By the time John saw the shed, he wasn't sure he could make it. His legs burned. His throat felt like sandpaper. Night was falling fast over the mountain, and he had no flashlight, no phone, no map, nothing, but a half-empty backpack and the stubborn refusal to lie down and die. The structure was barely visible through the trees, just a dark shape pressed into the rock face, maybe 2 hours away, maybe more. But it was something. And right now, something was all he had. John pushed forward. Branches clawed at his arms. Roots caught his boots in the growing dark. By the time his fingers finally touched the rough wooden door, the mountain had swallowed every trace of light. He couldn't see his hand in front of his face. He fumbled for a handle. Found it. Pulled. Inside, the air was stale. Cold. Dead. But it was shelter. Too exhausted to search for supplies. Too weak to care what else might be in here with him. John felt his way toward the back wall. His hands brushed against fabricate. He collapsed onto it without another thought. Sleep took him instantly. He had no idea what was waiting for him when the sun came up. Let's back up. John Mercer was 55 years old. He'd been hiking since his 20s, long before GPS watches and trail apps made the wilderness feel like a theme park. He preferred it the old waypaper maps, a good compass, and silence. Real silence. The kind you can't buy. This trip was supposed to be a reset, a solo week in the high country, far from cell towers and obligations. John had planned it for months, not because it was dangerous, but because he needed it. Life hadn't been kind lately. A divorce finalized in the spring. A career in engineering that had quietly ended when his company restructured. 2 adult kids who called on holidays and forgot the rest of the year. John wasn't bitter, he was just tired. So he packed his gear, filed his route with 2 friends, and drove to the trailhead at dawn. No itinerary, no schedule. Just 7 days to remember who he was before the world got so loud. The first 2 days were everything he'd hoped for. Crisp mountain air, eagles circling above the ridgeline, the satisfying ache of muscles doing what they were built to do. John felt lighter than he had in years. Out here, nothing needed fixing. Nothing needed explaining. The mountains didn't care about his failures. He smiled more in 48 hours than he had in 6 months. And then came the morning of day 3. John woke to the sound of something heavy moving through the brush. At first he thought it was wind. Then a branch snapped close. Too close. He lay frozen in his sleeping bag, ears straining. Another snap. A low grunt. Slowly, carefully, John unzipped the tent flap just enough to peer outside. His stomach dropped. 3 black bears were circling his camp. A mother and 2 cubs. The mother's nose was pressed to his food bag, hanging from a branch not 10 feet away. John had done everything right. He'd hung his food. He'd kept a clean camp. But it didn't matter. The bears had found him anyway. He didn't move. Didn't breathe. The mother turned her massive head. Her eyes swept across the tree line, then over the tent. For one sickening second, John was sure she saw him. Then she turned back to the food bag and swatted it down with one powerful paw. John's mind raced. The front of the tent was facing the bears, no way out without walking straight into them. But his pocket knife was in his vest, and the back wall of the tent was just nylon. He made a decision. Moving in inches, John slipped on his boots and grabbed his backpack still half unpacked from the night before. Then, with hands that wouldn't stop shaking, he pressed the blade to the tent fabric and cut a long, silent slit. He squeezed through, crouched low, started moving. Behind him, the bears tore into his supplies like they hadn't eaten in days. John didn't look back. By midday, John knew he was in trouble. In his rush to escape, he'd left behind almost everything that mattered. His phone, his GPS, his map, most of his food, and all of his water. He'd saved his life in the moment, but now he was stranded deep in the backcountry with no way to navigate out. He tried to retrace his steps, but the terrain all looked the same. Every ridge, every tree, every boulder. He picked a direction west. He hoped and started walking. Hours passed. The sun climbed, then began to fall. John's mouth grew dry. His legs grew heavy. He stopped to rest more often than he wanted to admit. He thought about his friends, the ones he'd told about this trip. They weren't expecting him back for 4 more days. By then he could be dead. Why hadn't he checked in with them? He'd had signal the first 2 days. He could have sent a text, a quick update, proof of life. But no, he'd wanted to be alone. He'd wanted silence. Now the silence was deafening. By late afternoon, John's vision was starting to blur. His water had run out hours ago, and there was no stream, no lake, no relief in sight. He needed shelter. He needed a miracle. And then, through a gap in the trees, he saw it. The shed looked abandoned. It was built into the rock face, half hidden by overgrowth, with no visible path leading to it. John guessed it was at least 2 hours away on foot, maybe more in his condition. But there was nothing else. No roads, no cabins, no smoke from a distant fire. Just the shed. He made it just as the last light drained from the sky. By then, he could barely stand. His legs buckled as he pushed through the door. Inside, it was pitch black. The air was stale and heavy with dust. John felt his way along the walls, searching for anything. Food, water, a blanket. His hands found a cot. He collapsed onto it without thinking, and was asleep before his head hit the fabric. When John opened his eyes, pale sunlight was leaking through cracks in the wooden walls. He blinked. Coughed. His throat felt like he'd swallowed sand. Then he looked around and froze. The shed was small, no bigger than a garden unit, but mounted on the far wall, next to a dusty cabinet, was something that didn't belong. A faucet. John stared at it. A faucet. In the middle of nowhere. He stumbled over, turned the handle, and waited. For a moment, nothing happened. Then water. Cold, clean, rushing water. John drank like a man who hadn't seen rain in a year. He drank until his stomach ached, until his head cleared, until he could finally think again. Then the question hit him. Where is this water coming from? He looked closer. The faucet was fed by a pipe that disappeared into the back wall. John knocked on the wood. Hollow. He knocked again, further down. Solid. He moved along the wall, tapping as he went, until the hollow sound returned larger this time. He pushed aside an old painting hanging near the corner. Behind it was a handle. John hesitated. His instincts told him to walk away, find help, let someone else deal with this. But he hadn't survived 3 days in the wild to leave questions unanswered. He pulled the handle. The wall swung open, revealing a hidden door. And beyond it, a stairway descending into darkness. John grabbed the flashlight he'd found in one of the drawers. It was weak barely enough to see 3 feet ahead, but it was all he had. He descended the stairs slowly, one hand pressed to the cold stone wall. At the bottom, he found a heavy metal door, industrial, reinforced, designed to keep people out. But it wasn't locked. John pushed it open. Inside, a large switch was mounted beside what looked like an emergency generator. He flipped it. The room flooded with light. And John stopped breathing. The space was enormous, carved directly into the mountain. The walls were lined with mounted animal heads, elk, deer, wolves, and species John couldn't even name. Glass display cases showcased antlers, pelts, and taxidermied birds. A full bar stretched along the far wall, stocked with aged bottles and crystal glasses. This wasn't a hunting cabin. This was a trophy room, hidden, illegal, and built to stay secret. John understood immediately. This lodge had been constructed to allow wealthy hunters to poach on protected land without consequence. The animals on these walls weren't trophies, they were crimes. And no one knew this place existed. John didn't linger. He grabbed enough food and water to make the hike out, sealed everything back the way he found it, and started the long walk toward civilization. 2 days later, he reached the nearest ranger station. He told them everything. Within a week, authorities had located the hidden lodge and launched a full investigation. The hideout was photographed, cataloged, and permanently sealed. Though no arrests were made due to a lack of direct evidence, the discovery triggered a dramatic increase in surveillance across the region. Over the following months, illegal hunting in that area dropped sharply. Rare species that hadn't been spotted in years began to return. John had stumbled into something dark, but in doing so, he brought light to a place that had operated in shadow for far too long. John still hikes those mountains today. He's more careful, now always checks in, always carries a backup phone, always files a detailed plan with people who care. But every time he passes the ridge where he first spotted that shed, he pauses, not out of fear, out of gratitude. He went into the wilderness looking to escape. He came out of it having made a difference. Sometimes, getting lost is how we find what truly matters.